Hi everybody. In this video we're going to learn about our new topic, absolute value. So let's talk about what absolute value is first. Absolute value of a number is just its distance from zero. So let's all write down distance, and then it's from, and we'll write down zero. Make sure you're doing this in our notes as well. When we denote, also known as writing down, absolute value of a number, we use these two symbols next to x, where the x can be any number. So as an example, you may see me write the absolute value of -2. And it's just these two bars, and we're going to put the number inside of it. You're going to notice that absolute value is never negative. Never. Why? Because distance is never negative. Distance can't be negative. You can't walk a negative distance. Even if you walk backwards, you traveled a positive distance. And distance can never be negative. So let's look at an example. Let's see how far 2 is from 0. Let's do this by first making a number line. Here we have a number line, and I'm going to go and number it 1, 2, 3, 4. On my left side, I'll write my negatives. -1, -2, -3, -4. So this question's asking me, how far is 2 from 0? So all I'm going to do is draw a line from 0 to 2. How far is that? Well, it is 1, 2 units. Let's ask the same question on the other side. They want to know, how far is -2? So let me draw a line from 0 to -2. Make sure you're drawing it with me. From 0 to -2, it is also 2 units away from 0. 1, 2. So what you should have noticed is that the absolute value of 2 and -2 give us the same answer. It is both +2. And write this bottom part with me. The absolute value of 2 is equal from 2, because absolute value, like we said before, is just measuring how far you are from 0. So the absolute value of 2 equals 2, and so does the absolute value of -2. Because even though it's negative, it's still only 1, 2 hops away from 0. So really, anything inside these absolute value bars just becomes positive after you solve them. Let's go on to our next slide. Let's try solving some of these problems. So here we have the absolute value of -34. So even though it's negative, absolute value of -34 would just be +34. Go try finding the absolute value of 12 on your own. If you solve the problem, the absolute value of 12 is just 12. The absolute value just turns it positive. Let's look at our next one. 10 to the second power. 10 to the power of 2. If we have a problem inside your absolute value, you must always solve it first. So 10 to the power of 2, even if you don't know what that is yet, all that means is it's 10 squared, or 10 times 10. So 10 times 10 gets 100. So this 10 squared becomes 100. So we have the absolute value of 100 now that we simplified the problem. Your final step is just to find the absolute value of 100, which is simply 100. Our next problem is a little funnier. Notice that we have a negative on the inside and then a negative on the outside. So the first thing we're going to do is solve the absolute value on the inside, that -22, and then we'll worry about that negative on the outside. Because the negative right here is on the outside, it cannot disappear, meaning it is waiting for our answer. I like to think of it as like a bully waiting outside someone's house. The second we get that -22 outside this house, as soon as we solve that problem, that negative sign on the outside there is going to attach itself to it. So what I mean by that is the absolute value of -22 is just +22. But because our negative right here was hanging out on the outside, It waits till the absolute value bars are done, and then it attaches itself. So make sure you put negative 22 down for that problem. Let's go check out the next problem. The next problem says the absolute value of 9 minus 3. So notice how we have a problem inside our absolute value bars. But just like we said before, all that means is solve the problem on the inside first and then apply the absolute value. So before we could do absolute value, we need to do 9 minus 3. If you do 9 minus 3, you end up with 6. So the absolute value of 9 minus 3 becomes the absolute value of 6. And then the absolute value of 6 is simply 6. The next problem is something we haven't learned yet, and we'll learn it later on this year. It says the negative absolute value of the square root of 121. You'll learn about that later this year, but for now, let's just realize that the square root of negative 121 is 11. So what will happen is this inside becomes 11, but we didn't do anything yet, so we're going to leave the outside alone. We still have negative, we have the absolute value signs, and let's put 11 in the inside there. Next, we could solve it. The absolute value of 11 is 11, but remember, if we have a negative sign, just like that, outside our absolute value bars, it waits till the bars disappear, and it sticks itself to the answer. So 11 is the answer, but because this negative is on the outside, now it's going to attach itself to 11. So you end up with negative 11. Our next problem is a fraction, 5/8. Even though it's a fraction, it doesn't change anything. Remember, absolute value is just turning the numbers inside of it positive. Well, 5/8 is already positive, so the answer is simply 5/8. Nothing changed there. I want everyone to pause the video and try the absolute value of negative 10 on your own. What do you get? The absolute value of negative 10 is simply 10. If you said that, good job. Go try the absolute value of negative 7.26 on your own. Don't be worried about it being a decimal. Solve it just like you solved the other ones. If you solve that problem, the absolute value of negative 7.26, or negative 7 2600ths, as it should be called, is just positive 7 2600ths. Notice, once again, all we did is we dropped the negative that was on the inside. And finally, as a quick wrap-up, our last question says, what is the absolute value of 25,000? And once again, we're just measuring our distance from 0. 25,000 is 25,000 steps away from 0. So that just turned positive, and it was already positive, so that was nice and easy for us. Let's go on to the next slide. Our next problem is a true or false one, and you'll definitely see problems like this on your test. The reason I'm showing it to you is because it can be very confusing. My hint is that you should always read from the absolute value symbol first. So look at the absolute value symbol first, and then go look at the other side of the equal sign and see if that makes sense. So the absolute value of negative 16, would that be 16 true or false? You could select one now. You should have picked true. The absolute value of negative 16 is 16. That is true. Let's try this next one. Remember, look at where the absolute value sign is first, and then go look at the number that came out of it. In math, it doesn't matter which side of the equal sign you're on. So don't be confused that the absolute value sign is on the right side instead of the left. That should make no difference. So go ahead and try it. Let's see the absolute value of 12. Does that equal negative 12? Tell me true or false. You should have picked false. The absolute value of 12 is positive 12. This had a negative 12 come out of it, which could not happen. It should have been positive 12. Our next problem is a decimal, so I'll do this one with you. It says 0.75 is equal to the absolute value of 3/4. Well, they're both positive, so it meets that requirement. But what you have to ask yourself, is 3/4 equal to 0.75? Now, if you remember, 3/4 is in fact equal to 0.75. And if we went and did our long division right now, you would get 0.75 as your decimal. So let's circle true for that one. We'll work more in fractions as this year goes on. Our final problem for this slide says the negative absolute value of 5/8 equals negative 5/8. I want you to answer this one on your own. Is it true or false? If you answered this one, you should have said false. The reason for that is because the absolute value of negative 5/8, it should have been positive 5/8. Notice they have a negative symbol right there, which if it's turning it positive, you can't be negative at the end. So you should have picked false. Make sure you have that down in your paper. Let's move on to our next slide. The next slide is asking you how to model these problems. And modeling these problems are one of the easiest models you'll have to make, because all we're really going to do is draw a line to whatever number they want us to go to. So as an example, if you look at our line right here, their line is going from 0 all the way down to 10. That means they're just asking, what is the absolute value of 10? And we should all know that the absolute value of 10 is simply 10. Let's look at example 2. Example 2 shows it going from 0 to negative 15 on our number line. That means they're asking us, what is the absolute value of negative 15? The absolute value of negative 15 is just positive 15. Because even though negative 15 is negative, it's only 15 steps away from 0. Let's go to our final 2 slides. These last problems are problems that you'll see on the test, and it is a 2-step problem. The first thing you always need to do is make sure you're reading that problem. If you read it, it says the absolute value of negative 5. So let's write that down, the absolute value of negative 5. The absolute value of negative 5 is equivalent to the distance on the number line between what? Well, we know the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. So what they're asking us is which of these answers, A, B, C, or D, are the 2 numbers that are there are 5 apart. So let's go ahead and mark our graphs and see how far apart they are. Negative 1 and negative 5 are right here. If you count, they are 1, 2, 3, 4 away. We're looking for ones that are 5 away. So it cannot be A. If we look at B, it says negative 5 and 5. If I go and count how far away they are from each other, they are 10 away. So it can't be B either. We're looking for 5 away. C says 1 and 5. Well, if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, that's another answer that's only 4 away. So it can't be that one. Through process of elimination, we know it's going to have to be D, but let's double check. 0 through 5. Well, if we counted how far away those are, they are exactly 5 away. So we were looking for the answer that equaled 5, and we found the answer that equaled 5. So we're going to circle it. This next one is just like the one we just did, but I'm going to ask you to do it on your own. So let's talk about it first, and then I'm going to ask you to solve it on your own. It says, what is the absolute value of negative 2? And it is equivalent to the distance on the number line between which ones? So same thing, we have the absolute value of negative 2. We should all know that that absolute value is 2. So what you want to go do is look at all these options and see which of these options have the 2 numbers only 2 spots away from each other. I'm going to do A, but I want you to do B, C, and D on your own. So I know A doesn't work because if I put a line at 1, and if I put a line at negative 2 and I draw a line, they're 1, 2, 3 away from each other. I'm looking for ones that are only 2 away from each other. So go ahead, look at those last 3 and see if you can figure it out on your own. Welcome back. If you solved that problem, the correct answer was D. And let's look at all the problems and figure out why. B cannot be the answer because negative 2 and 2 are 1, 2, 3, 4 away from each other. And we're looking for 2 away from each other. 0 and 3, if I mark them and count, 1, 2, 3, they're 3 away from each other. Cannot be the answer. But our final one, 2 and 4, if I put a line at 2 and a line at 4, they are only 1, 2 spots away from each other. And that's exactly what we were looking for, so it had to be D. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please let me know if you have any questions.